Corinthians last week, so that took a little bit to get through, and I appreciate him filling in for me. I feel like I've been AWOL for a while, but as Carolyn fell November the 13th, we hadn't hardly been anywhere except the doctors and therapy, and so 2 or 3 weeks ago, I said, let's just pack up and go somewhere. So I'd never done that in my life. Never gone anywhere without a plan, and never been anywhere what I had to be back. So none of that applied. So we packed up one day and left the next. And I knew we were going to Florida, but we didn't have any plans. Every night we would decide, do we want to stay here another night, or do we want to go somewhere else tomorrow? So that's how we operated for 2 weeks, and it was nice. Sometimes that's the best way. I've never done that before, but we enjoyed it. It was 90 degrees a lot of the times, and it was really, really, really nice. We went all the way down to almost to Naples and cut across and came all the way back up the East Coast, all the way up to Savannah, and then we spent 2 days coming home from Savannah. So we didn't really do anything other than we just traveled a couple thousand miles, and we enjoyed it. Carolyn's not in here yet, but I was going to tell her she's going to be a great grandmother. Caroline's expecting a little boy, and I forgot what month it is, but we've known about it for a week or two, but she told us not to tell till she went to the doctor the second time, and Carolyn texted her this morning and asked her if she could tell, and she said, yeah, go ahead and tell, but Carolyn's not seen that yet, so. So I'm telling and she doesn't know about it. She's going to be the great-grandma. I'm not that old, but she's going to be the great-grandma. And Sherry Allen's going to have a little granddaughter. I guess I should. Can I tell that? Okay. When I started to say that, I thought maybe I oughtn't be telling that. But anyway, it's a happy time. But anyway, in our chronological study, once we got through 2 Corinthians, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, the person who put this chronological Bible together feels like the next Bible, the next letter that Paul wrote was to the Romans. And you can see on this map, Paul was over here in Ephesus right there whenever he was writing to the Corinthians, and after that letter was delivered, he went on up into Macedonia and back down to Corinth and stayed there, I forgot what, 3 months, I believe it says. And from there, he wrote this letter over here to the Romans, to the church, to the Christians at Rome, a long ways over here. If you recall, in Acts chapter 2, on the day of Pentecost, there were Jews from Rome in Jerusalem that day that heard the first gospel sermon. I think it's Acts chapter 2, verse 10. There were Jews from Rome, and there were proselytes from Rome. And a proselyte, of course, was a Gentile who had been converted to Judaism. And they were there also. So I say all of that to say that was in AD 33. Now it's AD 56, 58, somewhere along there, 20-something years later. There's a bunch of Christians in Rome. Paul's not been there, but there's a bunch of Christians over there. And they, obviously, after the day of Pentecost, when they went back home, they continued teaching, and obviously they grew. I'm making a lot of assumptions, but that's how it worked. All these people came on Acts chapter 2, and then they went back home, and that's how it started. So Paul has been hearing a lot of good things about the Christians over in Rome. And he goes into detail here in just a little bit, and there were one or two things, two or three things that was the reason that he decided that he felt like he needed to write this letter to them. He wanted to explain the gospel to them in a little bit more clarity. He wanted to unite the Jews and the Gentile believers before his visit, and then he was going to ask them for help to go on over to Spain. That was his plan. Now, of course, we know that didn't work out. That part did not work out. But he does end up in Rome, doesn't he? But not the way he intended to go. Remember? He ended up going as a prisoner to Rome. And we'll talk about it. We're getting way ahead of ourselves here, but anyway, he does end up in Rome. And some of you, I don't know, Dan, have y'all been to Rome too?
That's the one European we haven't made.
Didn't make it.
It's kind of out. It's not even on the harbor.
Yeah, no, you got to go almost 100 miles from the harbor inland to get to Rome.
There's no good reason historically why it should be there.
Right. Of course, Rome was the capital at this time of the known world, I guess. Rome ruled everything, and even this area over in here too. But Carol and I ended up a couple times in Rome on some trips. But if you go to Rome now, there's two things that they're gonna push you into, and the two main attractions in Rome are what? Colosseum and the Vatican. You go to the Colosseum and you go to the Vatican. That's the tourist attractions. That's the tourist traps. But anyway, interesting enough, what Doug said. Interesting enough that the Colosseum, they started building it in AD 50, and Paul was there 10 years later. I don't know how much of the Colosseum that he saw being built while he was there later on. But anyway, to me that's interesting. But it was built in AD 50, and it was used they used it to persecute Christians, to kill Christians. We can talk about that. I've got all kinds of pictures. But anyway, that was one thing that went on in Rome. The inner city of Rome, the old part where Paul is writing, obviously, to these people, in AD 55, 56, it's relatively small. The ruins are still there. There's not like we do here. We tear everything down, build something new. They leave the old buildings, and some of them, they almost fall down, but the big columns and all that, those things are still there. And so to envision Paul writing to these people, it's really interesting to have that visual image in your mind. One time we saw, the one thing I remember was where Paul was in prison, where I don't know how accurate it was, but they showed us down the stairs, the jail cells, the remains of what was left of the jail cells and so forth. So how accurate that was or not, I don't know, but at least it was interesting. But Paul wrote this letter to the Romans for these 3 or 4 different reasons that I've just talked about. I forgot what else I wanted to say. I told him about your great-grandson, Carolyn. Caroline's in her text. She said, go ahead and tell everybody, so I'm telling everybody. What? You was hoping I had permission to tell that, right? I probably would not have done that without permission, but anyway, I'll clear that up. What? You were gone too. I told them that Carolyn was going to have a great grandson. And I'm not that old, but she's going to have a great grandson. But we're excited, and I'll have to say that. We sure are. What else do you want to say about Rome? There's a lot of history in Rome, but It's interesting, and yeah, I know what I was going to say. When Paul got to Corinth, I don't know how many years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, who was the first couple that he met? Aquila and Priscilla. Why were they in Corinth? Nero had made all of the Jews leave Rome. Now, I don't know how long that lasted, because Paul now is writing to Christians back in Rome, and some of them are Jews. Most of them probably are Gentiles, but some of them are Jews. So I don't know the history of that, how that worked, but it does say that Aquila and Priscilla were in Corinth because they had been run out of Rome because all of the Jews were forced out. And you can go back and look at those verses. But anyway, that part's interesting too. But all right, what else would you like to say? Well, I backed up this one verse, Acts 20, verse 2, where Sean finished up last week, I assume. It said he traveled through that area, speaking many words of encouragement to the people, and finally arrived in Greece, where he stayed 3 months. And from there, that's when he wrote this letter to the Romans in AD 56 to 58. They don't know exactly, of course. All right, verse 1. Paul, a servant of Christ Jesus, called to be an apostle and set apart for the gospel of God, the gospel he promised beforehand through his prophets in the Holy Scriptures. I thought about pulling some verses in there from that, but where would you go to almost immediately if you wanted to hear about the gospel or Christ beforehand in the prophets? Probably Isaiah. All of them probably, but Isaiah was probably the most prominent one. So you can go all the way back to the Old Testament and find Christ. You can find, Paul says here, the gospel that he promised. I don't know that it's worded per se in the Old Testament, the gospel or not, but we do know the good news, of course, that Christ was coming and that he was going to be a sacrifice for us. That was the good news, and all of the prophets talked about that, spoke about that, predicted that, told about that. So the gospel, Paul is saying, I'm an apostle for that purpose. I've been called to be an apostle to be able to explain the gospel to you. The gospel regarding his son, who as to his earthly life was a descendant of David. So obviously he's talking to Jews, and who through the Spirit of holiness was appointed the Son of God in power by his resurrection from the dead, Jesus Christ our Lord. So physically, as a person, as a man, he was of a descendant of David. And then, of course, he was the Son of God spiritually, as he says in verse 4. Verse 5 says, through him we received grace and apostleship to call all the Gentiles to the obedience that comes from faith for his name's sake. And you also are among those Gentiles who are called to belong to Jesus Christ, to all in Rome who are loved by God and called to be his holy people, grace and peace to you from God our Father and from the Lord Jesus Christ. So there, he makes it pretty plain that most of them that he's referring to here, writing to, are Gentiles. Though we receive grace and apostleship to call all the Gentiles to the obedience that comes from faith for his name's sake. So at this time, of course, there was still controversy about whether Gentiles could be included or not, and that was Paul's main goal, his main purpose. That was maybe not the 100% of his goal, but he went to the Jews also, but he was interested in making the Jews understand that Gentiles were just as welcome as the Jews were into this new plan. And that was a job. That was a chore to try to get some of the Jews to be convinced of that, and we'll see here in just a minute. And you also are among those Gentiles that he's talking about here. What do you want to say? Getting freedom, yeah. Yeah. A lot of the Jews didn't want the Gentiles to be a part of it. They wanted to be God's chosen people, and all you got to do is look over there today. A lot of them still feel that way, don't they? They still feel that they are the one and only, and nobody's going to convince them or make them believe otherwise, it seems. But that's certainly not in line with what the Scriptures teach. Paul says, first of all, I thank my God through Jesus Christ for all of you, because your faith is being reported all over the world. So I don't know how the messages got around back then, but Paul's over in Greece, and he's hearing about what was going on in Rome as far as the Christians there. God, whom I serve in my spirit in preaching the gospel of his Son, is my witness, how constantly I remember you in my prayers at all times, and I pray that now at last, by God's will, the way may be open for me to come to you. So God's my witness. I'm not lying about this. I think about you all the time, and it's in my desires to come to see you. I want to get over there. I definitely want to see you. I long to see you so that I may impart to you some spiritual gift to make you strong. Now that makes you wonder if anyone in Rome at that time had received the ability to impart spiritual gifts or to perform miracles. Makes it sound like they hadn't, did it? Makes it sound like no one was there to be able to do that. Of course, we know how that all worked, but I can't recall. There's nothing in the Scriptures that reveals that anyone that had received this power had gone on to Rome, but maybe they had. That is, that you and I may be mutually encouraged by each other's faith. I do not want you to be unaware, brothers and sisters, that I planned many times to come to you, but have been prevented from doing so until now. I planned many times to come to you in order that I might have a harvest among you, just as I have had among other Gentiles. I am obligated both to Greeks and non-Greeks, both to the wise and to the foolish. That is why I'm so eager to preach the gospel also to you who are in Rome. It sounds like that there was a big void there as far as getting the church going, and Paul realized that I've got to get there. I've got to get there because I realize all of the good that I can do if I can get there. So it was a job to get there at that point, of course. Obviously now wouldn't be a big deal, but he had to walk over there and ride a boat, which he does later, but it was a job to get there. And as Dan said, it's inland also. Once you ride the boat, then you've got about 80 miles, I think it is, to trek inland to get to Rome. By land, once you travel by sea. There's a big military base in Rome, an American military base, and I cannot pronounce the name of the port. It's a Calcavecchia or something like that. It's something weird. Tracy Garner reminds me that he spent several months there. And of course, he was in the Navy, but I do know they have a naval base there.
The number of people that lived in Rome, and the goods and services and food and water to keep those people there, it's staggering. And they were able to, they had the engineering capability to do that.
Yep. They built roads that are still being used. They built aqueducts. I don't know what, you go all the way back and study of Latin, they built aqueducts to bring water from the mountains, spring water from the mountains all the way to Rome. And those things, not entirely, they're not all standing there, but there's sections of them that are still there, that were built in, help me Dan, what year? A long time ago. Probably.
2,000 years ago. And the amazing thing about it is that the starting point where they picked up the water, the incline on it was gradual enough that it
No, it was all gravity. It was all gravity, right?
All gravity.
Yeah.
We get water in Monticello because it's pumped.
And we're not talking about 20, 30 miles. You're talking about 300 or 400 miles or long or farther. They built these Roman aqueducts. They were up on stilts, kind of like if you go through Atlanta, all these roads that are going every direction and all that. They were up on risers like that, but they were made out of stones. I don't know what they sealed them with, but
They invented something called concrete.
concrete. Okay. I thought they made all that in Texas. I didn't know they was made here. No, it's really, you need to look that up and read that. That's really, really interesting. You'll see those if you go over there. I think I may have told you this before. One class that I had when I was in high school that I don't know that they teach anymore was Latin. I had 2 years of Latin. Elizabeth Simpson taught Latin. They don't do that in Wayne County anymore, do they?
Lucy East was my
Lucy East. It was Lucy East. It wasn't Elizabeth Simpson, right? It was Lucy East. You take Latin?
only 2 years.
Only 2 years. All right. Now, I'm telling you, if you dig into Latin and learn Latin and study Latin, you've accomplished the English language. All of the root words from English language comes from Latin. Aqua, one I remember. But anyway, this all came from Rome. And they still speak Latin. You walk into one of the Roman Catholic church services over there, they're still doing it in Latin. But anyway, that's really beside the point, isn't it? That's really off track. Anyway, Paul tells them that I want to get over there. I got something I can share with you, and I think he says, what does it say? We can both benefit. That is, that you and I may be mutually encouraged by each other's faith. So, I don't know what else to say about that. For I'm not ashamed of the gospel, because it is the power of God that brings salvation to everyone who believes, first to the Jew and then to the Gentile. Did Raymond quote that this morning? I forgot. For I'm not ashamed of the gospel. It's the power of God that brings salvation to everyone who believes, first to the Jew and then to the Gentile. For in the gospel, the righteousness of God is revealed, a righteousness that is by faith from first to last, just as it is written, the righteous will live by faith. And that comes from Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 4. That's one you need to commit to memory, I guess, isn't it? Romans 1:16, if you haven't already. What is the gospel? The power of God that brings salvation, but what is it? Obviously, we say that it is the good news, isn't it? It is the fact that Christ came and lived a perfect life and was willing to sacrifice his life upon the cross as a sacrifice, and that he was raised from the dead after 3 days. That is the gospel. That is the gospel. He didn't do it because anything that he did that was wrong or anything like that, but you all know the story. But that's what it is. That's the gospel. And that gospel is the power of God that brings salvation to everyone. Everyone is conditional, though, to everyone who believes. A lot of people, as Raymond said this morning, want to add believes only to that, but it doesn't say that. Obviously, if you believe, then you're going to take the proper steps to confirm or exemplify what you actually believe. We know that. I'm preaching to the choir. I know that too. But still, it's good to have it for it to be re-impressed upon each and every one of us on a daily basis, maybe. Anything else you want to say through verses 16, 17?
It sounds simple,
It's too simple, isn't it?
But it's complex in a way too, you know.
Yeah, it is.
Everything that involves
Yeah.
after, I guess you'd say.
By faith, you have to believe that. By faith, you're believing something that's impossible by human standards. That's what faith is. Faith is believing something you haven't seen. We didn't see it happen. We didn't see him after he was raised from the dead. But by faith, we have seen him after he was raised from the dead. And it's stated that your faith is greater if you believe something you haven't seen than it is for something that you have seen. So that's what faith is all about. And faith is believing something that to mankind, to our normal physical things, it's impossible. That Christ could come to this earth and be born. He would be conceived by God as his mother be a virgin, and he would be born in that way. And it's just impossible. But we believe it happened. We know it happened. And that's what faith is all about. It's a simple plan. And all of the old, you're studying, reading the daily Bible, the sacrifices they made, and all the goats and bulls and sheep, and I can't imagine all of the blood and all of the mess and all of that was done for a purpose, but it did not achieve the ultimate purpose. It took the blood of Christ, of God's own Son, in order to do that, not the blood of bulls and goats. So it's a plan, and it's a simple plan, but as Carolyn said, it's simple, but it's complicated too. It takes some learning, it takes some teaching, it takes some knowing, and takes some believing and having faith. The wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godliness and wickedness of people who suppress the truth by their wickedness. How much time we got, Junior? A couple of minutes. This is a whole new section. Let me stop right there and pick up next week. If you want to ring the bell, go ahead and we'll. This is something completely different. All right, I guess everyone's out by now then. Appreciate you all staying, and we'll pick up with this verse 18 next week. Dale, you want to say our closing prayer this morning?
Heavenly Father, thank you again that we have opportunity to be together today to worship you, pray in a way to be pleasing in your sight. Be with us through the week, that we might all have a good week, stay close to God, live as we should, we can receive a home in heaven. We ask and pray in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen. Remember the business meeting for just a second.